I was hired on at Anza as a faculty director, and even during the interview process, I was warned that there were some difficulties and challenges that they were looking to fix and address. And, of course, I looked to assure them that I was the right person for the job. So they talked about, for example, the office being a little too woke in its approach. And whenever people use language and words, terms like that are highly charged, I always like to know, what do they mean? And so I asked them, what do you mean by that? Give me some examples. And they said, the faculty, when they go to the office that you would potentially be working for, they feel uncomfortable. They feel like they're being accused of being a racist, or called transphobic, or it's told that they're not very good teachers. And I said, well, by that definition, I'm not woke, but I can work with woke people, and I have worked with people who are woke, and brought them together to talk to others who are different from different perspectives. I thought I would be an environment where I would be supported to do my work, but as soon as I started to do it, like literally within the first couple of weeks, there were signs that, there was some deeply entrenched issues there at the campus around anti-Semitism, around authentic inclusion, around...
Let me, excuse me for interrupting, but I want to just clarify. There's a staff to this office that's independent of the faculty, and they have a reputation among the faculty for being, quote unquote, woke.
Yes,
and you're
yes.
warned of this as you're coming in as a faculty member with responsibilities to direct this office, that the people you're going to be working with there have a particular outlook, but you feel that you can handle that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, as an educator, I'm accustomed to, working with people from different perspectives. That's part of my work as someone who's in the diversity and inclusion field. How do we bring together diverse perspectives and help people identify common goals so that they can best serve their students and communities? And that was something that, I'd worked on many, many years, becoming a trained dialogue facilitator. And how do people navigate courageous or sticky conversations? How do we deal with complexity? Those are all things that I have a lot of background in doing and in guiding educators through. So to me, that just seemed to be, the basic field of education. You're always going to have these diverse perspectives and different opinions and viewpoints, but people still have to be able to work together to serve their students.
So how would you characterize the outlook of the staff that you inherited?
So I did over 60 hours of needs assessment conversations. And some of the first ones that I did were with the staff members. I wanted to see, what were the challenges they saw? How did they see the campus? So it's a small office, 2 staff members, myself, and a supervising dean of equity and engagement. One of the people who I first interviewed told me that they were a finalist for the position that I was in. And they told me that they were a former student at Anza College, and they just didn't understand why I, as an outsider, was selected. They had heard nothing about me. They didn't know what my commitment was to equity, and they basically told me at the end of the conversation that I would have a rough ride ahead of me, and they felt entitled to my position. And so that was an interesting thing to kind of walk into and to have that interpersonal component initially. But that quickly turned from just a one-to-one thing to a larger group dynamic during one of our first team meetings, which was shortly after that, initial needs assessment conversation. And that same person accused me of white speaking, whitesplaining, and supporting white supremacy during a team meeting.
Whitesplaining, white supremacy,
and white speaking. And I didn't know what they meant until many weeks later when I saw a slide that they were using where it was called White Supremacy Culture Characteristics. But during the context of the meeting, what was so jarring to me is, I was explaining a Google document. Perhaps we can put in events that are coming up. Since I'm so new, I don't know the flow of the year and so forth. Maybe you could tell me how you'd like for me to support various initiatives you're working on. And we can track what we're doing in our meetings and how we're spending our time and what our agendas are and begin to develop those. And that's when I was told to stop what I was doing and that what I was doing was white speaking and whitesplaining by the individual who had previously told me I'd have a rough road. And I was so shocked to hear those words used against me as a Black woman, a racialized Black woman. I had never in my teaching career heard other teachers talk to each other in such a way or say such words to each other. And I asked the person, I said, I haven't come in here calling anyone names or saying anything mean or rude to anyone. And I said, what you just said to me, it feels very hurtful and rude. I said, I don't like that kind of engagement with each other. Let's not call each other names. Let's just keep things professional. And when I said that, I was viewed as offensive to the other individuals on the call. And why I say that is because all their faces changed as though I was now injuring the person who had said those terrible words to me just by saying, please don't say those things. And from that moment onward, I started to notice, other small and large things that cued me into the fact that, when we were using these words, equity, diversity, inclusion, we were all meaning something different. And also my needs assessment conversations, folks had told me, like we have this long history of activism and social justice, but we're all meaning different things. And that's why we're kind of flatlining right now. We're on different pages. We're not all on the same page.
Excuse me again. Did you say that there was a dean who had oversight responsibilities in this area? I'm just wondering where he or she weighed in this process that you're describing.
Yes, there was a supervising dean. And after this event happened where I was called a white supremacist and white speaking and whitesplaining, I went to the dean. Because Glenn, normally, if there's a difficulty in communication on a team, I would be the person who would facilitate that, discussion, conversation, unpacking, if you will. But because I was the person being attacked, I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So I went to the supervising dean and I said, we need to get someone in, not me, because I'm not properly positioned, to talk about intercultural and inter-team communication. And how do we do that in a professional way? And she said, oh, I really don't think so. I don't think it was really meant that way. She said, I'll ask the person to apologize to you. And I said, okay, well, if you're not willing to bring someone in, then I'm going to ask that you yourself come to the team meetings just to maintain civility and, a civil discourse, because for me, I'm not comfortable talking to folks, who have called me a white supremacist and other harmful and derogatory terms. The dean started to come to the meetings, Glenn, but they didn't maintain an environment of civil discourse. They actually became the ringleader of a harassing and bullying environment. And everyone else deferred to that person. And so it was like a gang up each week. It became fairly quickly. My supervising dean in agreement with these individuals. The person never apologized to me. In fact, they stopped communicating with me completely. And it was as though I was a non-person. And others were encouraged to do the same. It just unraveled due to the lack of leadership at the senior leadership level as well. And later, as I, began to understand their ideology that they were working from, that became my, I wanted to know, who am I surrounded by? What are they meaning? What are they saying? That's when I, started to unpack and look at what they were talking about when they were mentioning white supremacy culture, they meaning my dean and my staff members. I saw one of their slides and it had these poison bottles on it. And it had things like being on time, being objective. And they kept putting it up in their meetings that they would host or with guests that they would invite to campus. And, we're here in Zoom. This is all digital during the pandemic time. And so one day it had a citation and I went and looked up who is that? And I found Timo Okun's work, Okun and Jones. And then I started to better understand what they were meaning when they were saying white supremacists and calling me that and accusing me of that because I was attempting to set an agenda in the meeting that was considered to be offensive to their worldview. But Glenn, I felt offended because it was as though they were telling me they had an expectation of me they use this term BIPOC, it's Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. They set the world up in a binary between BIPOC and white people. And so their expectation of BIPOC people is that we're not on time. We don't set agendas. We don't look at the written word. We should be doing everything actively against that. And to me, that's setting yourself and your students and your community up for failure. All the things I had taught my students to value, how do you become young scholars? How do you contribute to your community and be involved civically? it involved the things, the characteristics that they're calling and labeling white supremacy culture and giving to, white supremacy culture. And I find that deeply offensive because, that means they have low expectations of me. I'm supposed to be the opposite of that, the embodiment, the opposite of that in this equity, faculty director role. Just realizing their low expectations of me, and their assumptions about me, just based purely on how I look from the outside. I found that to be very hypocritical of everything that they talk about, when they say they want people to be their authentic selves and their whole selves. That's not what was happening there.